In this picture, we see the bombardment of Fort Sumter. Fort Sumter was a military that belonged to the Union but was in Confederacy territory. Remember, the Union was the North and the Confederacy was the South. The president at this time was Abraham Lincoln. The Confederacy was afraid that President Lincoln would not only stop the spread of slavery to new states, but that he would try to take away slavery in their states. This caused a division between the North and the South, which eventually led to a war. After the Battle of Fort Sumter, it became obvious that this war could not be avoided. Let's go over our vocabulary words before we read our story. Our first word is civilians. Civilians are citizens who are not in the military or on a police force. Police officers and firefighters protect the civilians in areas where they work. I want to talk about the ending of that word. Civilian ends in I-A-N. These three letters are often added to a noun or an adjective to form the name of the person who performs an activity connected with that word. For example, civilians are people who are civil members of society or who are regular citizens. A comedian is someone who performs comedy. Let's look at some other examples. A musician is someone who plays music. A magician is someone who is skilled in magic. A politician is someone who works in politics. And a mathematician is someone who is skilled in mathematics. Clash. To clash is to collide in intense disagreement. For example, Ralph and his younger brother would often clash over who would get to use the computer first. Devastated. Devastated means destroyed. For example, the forest was devastated by the wildfires. Flee. To flee means to run away quickly from danger. For example, when the hurricane warning came, people began to flee from their oceanfront homes. Rebels. Rebels is the nickname that was given to the Confederate soldiers during the Civil War. A civil war is fought between people of the same nation. Usually in a civil war, two or more groups of citizens in a country believe in things so strongly they fight each other in order to get their way. The war that began with the Battle of Fort Sumter would later come to be known as the U.S. Civil War, or the War between the States, and it was an awful, bloody time in American history. We refer to this war specifically as the U.S. Civil War instead of just the Civil War, because there have been, and continue to be, other civil wars in other countries. After the Battle of Fort Sumter, both sides, the Union and the Confederacy, built up their armies as quickly as possible. Throughout the North, people wanted President Lincoln to do whatever he could to end the war quickly. And most people assumed that the war would end quickly. After all, the Union had more people, more factories, a larger army, and a powerful navy. The first true test between the armies of the North and the South came in July 1861 in the state of Virginia. Virginia is home to the city of Richmond, the capital of the Confederacy at the time of the Civil War. Today, Richmond is the capital of Virginia. Virginia also touches Washington, D.C., the capital of the United States. 3 months after the Battle of Fort Sumter, thousands of Union and Confederate soldiers met in Virginia for the first major battle of the Civil War. Remember, the Union soldiers were fighting for the North, and the Confederate soldiers were fighting for the South. As president, Abraham Lincoln was commander-in-chief of the U.S. Army, also called the Union Army. The President of the United States is always the commander-in-chief, or top commander, of the Army and other armed forces. Lincoln decided to try to end the war quickly by sending his army to destroy the Confederate army in Virginia and capture the city of Richmond. Soon it was decided that a large Union army would invade Virginia. The Union army moved toward the town of Manassas, where there was a small river called Bull Run. The plan was for the Union army to crush whatever army the Confederacy tried to put in its path, and then march on and attack Richmond. Remember, Richmond was the capital of the Confederacy at this time. The Union Army had 35,000 soldiers, which up to that day was the single largest army ever assembled in America. The Union did not realize, however, that the Confederate Army, or the rebels as they were also called, had roughly the same number of soldiers in the area. Think back to what the word rebellious means. Why do you think the Confederates were called rebels? A large Confederate force had marched within 25 miles of Washington, D.C. They set up camp at the town of Manassas and waited to see what the Union Army would do. That July, the Virginia summer heat was so hot it was sometimes hard to breathe. Union soldiers, many wearing heavy wool clothing, marched slowly for 2 days over rolling farmland and across shallow, muddy creeks. The Confederate soldiers waited for them at Manassas. Later, soldiers in the Union Army wore blue uniforms, and soldiers in the Confederate Army wore gray uniforms. These two colors became symbols for the Union and the Confederacy. By July 21st, it was clear that the armies were going to clash. The only question was, who is going to fire the first shot? Take a minute to guess. Who do you think is going to be the first to fire? Many wealthy citizens from Washington, D.C., including members of Congress, traveled with the Union Army on its march from the capital. Like so many others, these civilians, or non-soldiers, expected a quick battle, a rousing victory for the Union, and a quick end to the Confederate cause. These civilians wanted to witness the Union's victory and the Confederacy's defeat with their own eyes. Now imagine what it might have been like for those civilians who traveled from Washington, D.C. to Manassas to watch the battle. They had driven their carriages and packed nice picnic lunches. They brought telescopes so they could see the action. Some had even brought their wives and children to watch history in the making. Imagine a family watching the battle unfold from atop a grassy hill. Do you think you would have liked to have been there to watch the battle? Civilians would watch from behind a line of Union artillery, or cannons. As the Confederates marched across the field, the Union guns opened fire. Smoke filled the air so that civilian observers could no longer see what was happening. They could not see the disaster that was unfolding right in front of them, but something they heard gave them an idea that this battle was not going to go as Lincoln and his generals had hoped. What do you think it was they heard that made them think this? The Confederate Army did not run away as the Union had hoped. Instead, amid the firing of cannons and rifles, a new, terrifying sound emerged. This sound would come to be known as the rebel yell, and it would haunt Union soldiers for years to come. It was a high-pitched scream, a battle cry, which the Confederates yelled out as they attacked the Union Army. Despite careful planning, almost nothing went according to the plans the Union Army had made. The Confederate cannons were older and less powerful than the Union's cannons, but the Confederate soldiers firing them seemed to have more skill or ability. Several of the Confederate commanders seemed to have more skill than the Union commanders as well. One commander, named General Thomas Jackson, showed particular courage and intelligence. That day, General Jackson earned the nickname Stonewall Jackson because he stood like a stone wall against the Union attack. Stonewall Jackson went on to earn a reputation as one of the most brilliant generals in the Confederate Army, although he was killed halfway through the war. This painting shows him on his horse at the Battle of Manassas. Stonewall Jackson and the rest of the Confederate Army won the First Battle of Manassas. By late afternoon, the Union Army broke apart and retreated, or went back toward the safety of Washington, D.C. The civilians who had come to watch the battle were shocked to realize that they were in the path of the retreating Union Army. Remember, retreating means to run away. The road back to Washington, D.C. quickly became clogged as the soldiers, running in on horseback, ran into panicked citizens trying to flee in their carriages. Flee means to quickly run from danger. Thousands of Union and Confederate soldiers were wounded or captured in this battle. Hundreds of men on both sides died as a result of those wounds, because doctors didn't have the equipment or training then that they have today. The landscape around the battlefield was also devastated, with roads, bridges, and entire hillsides in ruins. This image shows the destruction caused by the battle to both people and the land. A few days before, this was all lush, green farmland. This was just the first of many, many battles in the years the Civil War took place, and the battles would be much bloodier in the months and years to come. After that first battle, which was called the First Battle of Manassas, or the First Battle of Bull Run, President Lincoln and others in the North realized that this Civil War would not be easy to win. The Union realized that they would need a much larger army, and, more importantly, they would need to prepare for a much longer war. In fact, within a year, many people would be wondering whether the Union would be able to win the war at all. What do you think is going to happen? Do you think that the Union will win, or the Confederacy? All right, students, I want to talk about a certain proverb today. Proverbs are short traditional sayings that have been passed along orally from generation to generation. These sayings usually express general truths based on experiences and observations of everyday life. While some proverbs do have literal meanings, meaning they mean exactly what they say, many proverbs have a richer meaning beyond the literal level. The proverb I want to talk about today is the saying, "Easier said than done." Have you ever heard that saying before? If something is easier said than done, that means that it is easier to say how the task should be completed than it is to actually complete the task. If someone had said to President Lincoln, "This war should be over by now," he may have responded by saying, "That is easier said than done." See if you can think of an example of something that is easier said than done. I also want to take just a minute to talk about speech registers. Speech registers are different ways that we talk to different people. Sometimes we change the way that we are speaking depending on who the audience is and the situation that we are in. For example, when we're talking to teachers and other adults, we'll speak one way, and when we talk to our friends, we usually speak a different way. When you say hello to Mrs. Davis or Mr. Carpenter in the morning, you might say, "Good morning, Mr. Carpenter. How are you today?" But if you say hello to a friend in the morning, you might say, "Yo, what's up?" Different situations call for different types of speech. In the read aloud, we heard that as president, Abraham Lincoln was a commander-in-chief of the U.S. Army, also called the Union Army. How do you think you would speak to Abraham Lincoln? Do you think you would talk to him more like how you talk to Mr. Carpenter or Mrs. Davis? Or do you think you would greet him the same way you talk to your friends? What about when you say hello to your great-grandmother? Or when you say hello to your baby brother? What about greeting a doctor? Which speech register will you use? How will you talk? Throughout the rest of this week, I want you to think about when you talk to different people, how differently you're talking to them, depending on who they are and the situation that you're in. Hello again, my friends. As always, I've got some questions about what we learned about today. My first question is about the name of this war that we started learning about. Why was it called a war between states or a civil war? Why did we call it the U.S. Civil War? You got it. It wasn't a war against another country, but a war between two different groups in the same country. What were those two different groups? The North and the South, or the Union and the Confederacy. Remember, the Union is the North and the Confederacy is the South. Why do you think the first major battle of the Civil War was fought in Virginia? Why Virginia? There are a couple reasons. It was close to Washington, D.C., which was the capital of the United States, and it was close to Richmond, which was the capital of the Confederacy during the time of the Civil War. Who do you think came up with the name rebels for the Confederate soldiers? Who do you think? And who were the rebels? Were they fighting for the Union? No, the rebels were fighting for the Confederacy. Why did President Lincoln and many people in the North think that the war would end quickly? The North, you'll remember when we talked about the differences between the South and the North. The North's economy relied on factories. They had lots of different factories that could manufacture weapons and uniforms quickly. They also believed that the South had a smaller army and that their weapons were older or less advanced than those in the North. Was that the case though? Did the war end super quickly right away like they were expecting? No. The war continued to drag on, and it was a lot tougher than anyone thought it would be. What do you think President Lincoln is going to do now that he has realized that the war against the Confederacy is not going to end so easily? Make a prediction. What do you think President Lincoln is going to do now? Alright, my friends, we will find out what he does next in our next lesson. For right now, go ahead and open up the PDF that's attached to this assignment. I'm going to jump over to my computer so I can show you what to do on that assignment. There is no assignment for you to turn in today, my friends. The PDF that's attached to this assignment is just a letter for your families to let them know what we will be learning about in this domain in the next couple of weeks. Again, this next week, I want you to be thinking about different speech registers that you're using and different situations that you're using those different registers in. There is no assignment for you to turn in today, though. We will see you guys next time.